Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of SBC Podcast. We have with us today Alexis Bell, also known as the Fraud Doctor. Today we will cover some areas of risk mitigation using fraud detection, prevention, and fraud combating techniques for organizations. So Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rashid. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So Alexis, tell us a little bit about your profession. This is one you don't encounter a lot of times.
Sure. So in the anti-fraud industry, my firm looks at, on the consulting side, we do consulting with organizations to either build an internal program that they currently don't have already, or to help them enhance one of the existing components of that. And that looks like the investigations piece, which is my favorite, the fraud awareness training, the risk assessments, the data analytics, and the communication strategy, and also the governance.
Yeah.
Can't forget governance.
Right, awesome. So why is fraud so ever present in our lives and doesn't seem to be going away?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I think that, we know based on statistics that all organizations, regardless of the industry, are at risk for about 5% of the revenue, right, as a benchmark. So we see this in every industry. There's no industry immune. We see it in every geographic location. No country is immune. It's pervasive.
Right. And it's one of these things that can just be overlooked easily because people just look for the obvious things, but they don't think about these things like risk, managing risk, mitigating risk, and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I are both business owners, and
Right.
can you imagine building your business up from the ground, and you've done all of this great work, you have this outstanding service offering, and you're doing really, really well, and you
Right.
have one bad fraud event, and that can just bring the whole house down.
Right, yeah, because I mean, it's like people spend big budgets on technology and all of this, and they sometimes overlook the human element, which sometimes can be one of the weakest areas where, where things can happen or bad things can happen that can take down a business technically.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, Alexis, one of the areas we focus on here is usually surrounding people, whether it's hiring, selection, and then ongoing people issues, if you would. What are some of the areas or some of the trigger points where some of the techniques that you advocate and that you teach and that you help people with can be utilized? I mean, starting with the hiring and selection process, whether it's reviewing resumes, whether it's reviewing the credentials, to maybe ongoing operations. And prior to the show, we had a conversation about the trigger points and areas where you wanna take the opportunity to look at some things. Can you go over those a little bit?
Sure, that's an excellent question. I think that, we saw that when there was trouble in the economy, that one of the first things to go when people were trying to save money was background checks. And that's really unfortunate because if you think about it, that as people are losing their jobs and as people are losing their homes because they lost their jobs, the pressure for them to steal is greater.
Right.
Maybe one spouse, maybe it was a two-income home, and then now all of a sudden it's one. And so the pressure for the one that actually has the job has dramatically increased.
Right.
That's not to say that in that situation everyone would steal, but
Right.
that the pressure has dramatically increased. And so we think that at the hiring phase, absolutely, everyone should have a background check just to make sure you have the right people coming into the organization. But at the same time, you have some people that they've never been in trouble, and now all of a sudden they've decided to do something wrong in your organization. So you need to have ongoing checks. You need to make sure that 20 years don't go by before you check again to make sure that there was an issue. And then I think the area that is the most often overlooked is in promotions. So when an employee gets or is a candidate for a promotion, certainly there should be a background check at that point, especially if the position is one of trust.
Right, very true. And then they may have access to more things now, more sensitive information, and different types of due diligence may be required at this point. So that's an excellent point. So what are some of the tips that people can utilize while they're waiting maybe to afford your services and bring you in to do that? Or when you go in, what are some of the areas where you look? I know we've talked about a couple of different things like having policies and having consistency. And then say, for instance, when we look at resumes, what are some of the things maybe we can look for? What are some of the telltales of maybe obvious to you because you're an expert, but may not be obvious to your typical business owner?
Sure. I mean, we have issues often with fake identities. And we see often that people will steal credentials, the resume of a completely other person, and then use that as their own.
Right.
And it could be that it's a real person, that all of the rest of the information is from someone else. And you can do some easy searches to see if that resume is showing up in someone else's name. That's just a simple thing that you can do for
Right.
sure. Checking the education, that's critical. I think that on credential fraud, that's probably the one that we see the most, that people lie about their education.
Right, like on diploma mills as well.
Exactly, exactly. And even if you're calling the references, those are the names of the people that they have given you. And you're not really sure that
Right.
that is the actual person working at that company, or are they pretending to be that.
Right.
So talking to other people inside that organization just to make sure, I
Right.
think is a good idea also.
I agree.
But I think what you and I had talked about before was about consistency. You know, HR really needs to have a policy that's consistent across the board. So even if you have a trusted employee that's been around forever, don't skip them. Run them through your process and make sure that everybody is treated the same.
Yeah, yeah. I know you've just been recognized and you've been put in a very prestigious position. Can you speak a little? I mean, I know you're trying not to brag, but can you speak a little bit about that?
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, so I have been involved with the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners for a long time.
Right.
And recently, last year, I was elected to the Board of Regents, which is their version of their global board of directors. And then last February, I was elected chair of the board.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, that is huge. That is big. So you listeners, you are hearing from the utmost expert right here. So, Alexis, what are some other tips for leveraging the types of techniques? I know you're also launching like courses online, and so where people can go. So I would like you to speak a little bit about that, and then maybe a preview of some of the things that people can go there and learn.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so, training is a big component of what we do in my firm. We
Right.
do a lot of live seminars. I just did a keynote speech in Dallas at a fraud conference there. And then we got a full day workshop on root cause. But I also have a lot of people, I do work in developing countries also, and so budget is a concern. They don't have the budget to be able to travel for some of the live training. And people are constantly asking me about, how do I analyze data for fraud? How do I do that? And what do I do if I don't have the fancy software to be able to do that?
Right.
So I sat back and decided that it is possible to teach people how to analyze data by just using spreadsheets. And it's not ideal.
Right.
Ideally, you would have the software and there's certain things that you have to do for court. But if you go through the steps that we teach you how to do, then you'll learn what are the things that you should be looking for, specifically exactly how do you do it. And I actually recorded myself going through it. So you get to see a video of click here, drag this, do this, write this formula.
Right.
And I think even more importantly, why? Why are we doing it this way? Why
Right.
is this important?
Yeah.
So the first course is all about data quality. It's everything you need to know about what do you have to do to data before you analyze it for any reason.
Right. Yeah, because garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's actually one of the things we talk about.
Yeah. Awesome.
And then the next part is a case study. I designed a data set based on things that I found interesting in data over the years doing investigations. And then the last one will be on Benford's Law. How do you use that analysis? And now that you've done the case study, we'll teach you Benford's so that you can see how that works on that particular data set.
Can you give people just a little bit of a quick introduction to Benford? Just a quick.
You could teach a semester course on Benford's.
right.
So the short answer is that it's an algorithm, a mathematical equation that looks at naturally occurring numbers. So we primarily use this in transaction level data. Through the analysis, you're able to determine, is something naturally occurring, or is it, if it's not, then most likely it's a human manipulation. And human manipulation could be an error, or it could be fraud. And so there's certain things that we look for in that.
So it's like looking for anomalies and things typically like that are, that don't look right.
Exactly, yeah.
In layman's terms. So Alexis, is there anything else that you think people should know that maybe may have not come up in the conversation so far?
Oh, I think it's vast, right? I
Right.
think that, more and more people come to me and they're the only certified fraud examiner, or they're the only person in the organization that's tasked with protecting them from fraud. And if they're a junior person, they may not be the right person to help build an entire program.
Right.
So there are people out there, myself and others, that have specialized in helping companies build programs.
Right.
And that would start with the governance piece, certainly the policies and the procedures, and then building out the other components. So make sure that when you're putting this program in place, that you have the right people helping you build that.
Mm-hmm. And what is the typical time frame to like build out a program, and then maybe if you can go into an idea of what it takes to sustain it and maintain it? Because obviously, like, you don't want it to be the flavor of the month, and then because it's not going to be effective.
Right. I mean,
Am I right?
Yeah, you have to feed it, right? You
Right.
have to have people that's their focus. You have to have a budget that supports it.
Right.
You can't have a budget of zero and expect anything to happen in a positive way. I think that the time frame depends on the maturity of the organization. So if you have an immature organization, then it's going to take a lot longer to build the program. You would not do sophisticated solutions when the organization isn't ready for
Right,
that.
right.
So you have to build the programs at the stage that the organization is in. And if it's a really, really large organization, like a tier one financial institution, it would take years
Right.
to actually get it to a certain place that now you're talking about maintaining it and just making it better as you go.
So that's a great point there, because I mean, well, let's say if you're a smaller business, is there some bad habits that you can start developing like from the get go, or is that something reserved to like bigger companies?
Oh no! I mean, you know how it is. When
Right.
you start out, you wear all the hats in the organization.
Right,
You're
right.
the company of one,
Right.
and then you start bringing more people in, and they have their area of focus. And the more time that goes by, the more precise you are with your policies. The more precise you are with your procedures. Laws change. You have to
Right.
address those as you grow, and your service offering or your product offering grows. Then you need to make adjustments for those things. And so I think that as the organization grows, you have to be able to focus on it in that way.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like it's never too soon with those things, especially like when it comes to like some of the obvious ones. Obviously, doing your due diligence, looking at who you're bringing into your organization and giving access to, I guess, your clients, your clients' personal information, depending on the type of business, but in just about any business. So I totally agree. Any other tips or anything things that come to mind?
Oh, I was going to mention that, we're sitting here in Florida, right?
Right.
And so there's a huge focus on healthcare and the medical field.
Yeah.
And so you have a lot of doctors it's a single doctor, and then they have a small staff, but they have large volume,
Right.
Because this is a retirement area. It's a
Right.
magnet for retirees.
Yeah.
And, they are at risk too. You don't have to have a large organization before you should start having that conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And then it's an interesting point you bring up, because in this state, we always seem to be in one of those top states for identity theft and fraud and identity fraud. I don't remember the specific statistics, but we're usually in there and somewhere between the first and the second. I think because we have a huge population of the elderly, which crooks tend to kind of prey on, and we have students too,
Exactly.
big body of students and things like that. So there's a lot. There's so many directions you can go with when it comes to obviously fraud, combating fraud, and any identity theft and all these different aspects of it, or tentacles of.
Exactly. I mean, I've spent most of my career studying what I call the core frauds. So these are the frauds that if anybody that has a back office, you have a risk for these things. And most people are surprised to find out there's 96 different fraud schemes that you have to worry about.
Wow.
And so there's 96 different schemes that you should have at some point sat down and built controls around that, built processes to protect yourself against that, built education around that. And if you've only focused on maybe the 4 or 5 things you see often, then you have, this huge blind spot that
Right.
you're at risk for that you haven't even considered, much less the industry-specific things.
Yeah, no, that sounds overwhelming. Like that.
A little bit.
Yeah. So, are there any strategies or any tips for like someone with limited resources, like how maybe they can boil that down a little bit, or maybe say what's the worst ones or the ones that I don't know if you have any any insights into like maybe statistics or what are the most common ones or
That's a
anything
great
like
question.
that?
Yeah, so I spend a lot of time. I work with companies that have huge budget, and then I work with companies that have almost no budget whatsoever. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how can I help those folks
Right.
to protect themselves that have very little budget. And part of what I did was I designed a fraud risk assessment that the whole phase one is all the stats. If there's a stat out there about fraud, it has been pulled into this report. And then it's adjusted by industry, it's adjusted by geographic location, the number of
Wow.
employees, all these different factors. And at the end, what you get is you get a report that prioritizes your risk for your organization. Because I think that when companies hear, oh, 96 schemes, that they get a little overwhelmed and I think I don't even know where to start. And so this report gives you, if you were to focus on just a few things, this is your biggest bang for your buck right here, where you need to focus right now today.
Yeah.
And that's why I did that.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. How do we get our hands on that?
Oh, great. Yes, you can go to the website and there's information about the information there. It's fraud-doctor.com.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, that's it sounds like that's a big project to just put that together, to get all that
You know, it
information.
did. It took me a month to design it, all the calculations and everything of doing nothing else but that. It was quite mentally intensive to be able to do that. And I had used it over the years for a really long time. And at first, I was only using it for myself and my investigations as a place to, like a direction of inquiry.
Right.
But then I started applying it to companies and helping them at the beginning, right? Because your risk assessment ideally feeds into your annual audit program. And so this helps your audit be more focused on risk.
Right.
And so this gives you a nice objective way to do it. It's statistical. You're not looking at subjective information about what I think.
Right.
It's
right.
objective.
It's more factual, and then you can just zero in on the things that are relevant.
Exactly. And then as more people were hearing about it, now recently we've made a partner program. So firms that have clients that want to offer the fraud risk assessment to them, we have a white labeling where we'll do the work and then they can give that to their client. It has their branding on it.
Yeah. No, that's awesome, and all of that is available on your website, right?
It is. There's a page called Become a Partner, and it has a listing of all of our partner programs, like the due diligence that we do that's global, has a global reach.
Yeah. No, awesome. And also on the footnotes, we will put links to
Oh, great, thanks.
Alexis' information. Anything else you would like to leave the listeners with, or any parting comments or call to action or anything?
Yeah, I think that, don't wait until something bad happens. We know that if you spend a little bit of money on prevention, then you can save a lot of money on fraud walking out the door. And I just think that it's absolutely critical. It's not something that you can just let go, and don't think that it's something that happens to everyone else.
Yeah. No, awesome. I agree. I've been caught many times quoting Jim Rohn, like saying the power of discipline weighs in ounces, when the power of regret weighs in tons. So
Exactly. That's
yeah,
a great one.
yeah.
I love it.
Awesome. So, well, it has been a pleasure
thank
and
you
an
so
honor
much.
to have you, Alexis. And listeners, this concludes this week's episode of the SBC podcast. Links will be available in the footnotes, and you can also find links at sbchecks.com and their blog. Thank you very much.